Okay, we're recording, and I'm going to share my screen. Okay. That did not work.
I think it's option.
Try it's big.
Option click.
All right. First on the list is the .NET Client Auto REST Client Generator. Just to give some background history summary on this, we're sort of still working out our client strategy. We've got a document that states, like, you know, make clients in the Kubernetes client repo. We have a generator repo. We're still sort of staging the generator repo and getting it ready. So the question came up of Brendan or a team that Brendan knows has a .NET client that they've generated with an alternative generator, and so there's some discussion on the mailing list about whether that means we should, whether it's okay to have multiple generators going on in our generator repo. If we want to generate everything with the same repo, you know, does that make sense? Does it make things easier or harder? Yeah, so that's where we're at. Yeah, does anyone else want to say anything about this?
I can just clarify why it's on the mailing list thread, but basically there's a version of .NET that is cross-platform that works on Linux and Windows and Mac OS X. The generator that we're using generates the code for that version of the language. The existing Spider code framework is not. And so we would prefer to use the one that is cross-platform. Concern, raising Mehdi's concern that was on the thread, just to summarize for everybody, was effectively around consistency. But I think that if we set goals around the outcomes we want rather than specifying the tools, then I think that we will probably get where we need to be and be more flexible as a community. So we can say, you know what, we value consistency, or we value, you know, things like it has to all come from the same open API spec and things like that. I think we'll achieve.
Yeah, I think where I come down on that is it should all generate from the same source, and the name should match across different clients. And
are we doing that? Like, are we generating clients that even look the same in the different languages? Like, is Python going to look similar to Java? I know if with Java, there's a Fluent style client that's significantly different. And there, some of the languages at least have different idioms, and I'm not that familiar with what those idioms are, but yeah, I can imagine idiomatic libraries for different languages. But I think whatever we do agree the criteria are, like Brendan was saying, we need to document them.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
And you know, we've got a document started. It doesn't cover this case super well because we didn't anticipate this question. So I think we've been talking about this quite a bit here, and I think something we need is, what's the criteria for dropping something in the Kubernetes client repo or org? And I think we want to look at our client requirements doc and see if I don't know if we want to require, like, you know, alpha and bronze level, or if we want to invent some slightly lower level as a threshold. But we need to document what we want. Like, I don't care what goes in Kubernetes incubator, but
well, except that everything is going. All the clients are outside the Kubernetes org.
Kubernetes client GitHub org. I think people look at the Kubernetes client GitHub org and expect it to host like official clients.
Well, regardless of whether we consider it official or non-official or whatever, and we need to document things like how stable should they expect it to be from an interface stability
Yeah, so
point of view.
we have like a badge system defined in the client doc, which partly addresses that, but then we need to actually distribute badges and display them in the repo.
Well, there's part of it is the badges, but also part of it is deciding, for example, maybe we need a .NET library that's out there so we can get feedback or whatever. But if we're not that confident that the function signatures will stay the same, because maybe we'll change them to be the names of the ones in the Java client or what.
That's fine. We can call
whatever.
it alpha in that case.
I mean, I think that Brian's point, and I think it's a good one, is that the document, while it spells out compatibility levels, it really doesn't spell out deprecation policies and versioning histories, and it doesn't even say like thou shalt use semantic versioning or anything like that.
I know it says you need to have a deprecation policy and a version policy to be the.
Right, but I mean, I think that for consistency purposes, if you're going to say like, hey, we need consistent naming, I think you probably ought to have a consistent deprecation policy too.
And we're going to need a consistent
fair.
Release process.
That's totally fair.
Also.
Right. I would also advocate very strongly for the fact that if this is going to be sustainable, it's going to have to be decentralized, and decentralization is going to mean you're going to have to give up a degree of control.
So I totally agree with that. So the thing that I think we've still got some lingering worries about, or at least I do, is what happens if we accept a client and the maintainers all like switch jobs or something, or
But why are you guys any more special than anybody else, right? Like, I mean, that could happen to any of these projects.
I think the community should be worried about it happening to us, to a equivalent degree.
But I mean, but
we're not going anywhere, but like
everything, right? Like, we could all get hit by buses tomorrow. Like,
right, exactly.
Like a silly concern, or maybe an irrelevant concern.
So maybe we need to come up with what we do when the maintainers vanish or something.
Sure. I mean, and I think that having things like, saying there should be 2 owners, like just like in other systems where people do this sort of thing, I think that makes total sense, right? Because that at least.
Yeah.
I think asking a statement of intent up front is reasonable. Like we have people who say, well, I'll give you this code, but I'm not going to maintain it. So
right. I think it's perfectly okay to say, like, you know what, this is a commitment, and you need to have that, but I think we have to trust people and realize.
Sure. I totally agree with that.
Yeah. I do want to say, I think there's one part of the commitment that hasn't been mentioned. And with the last release, there was a little bit of lag getting the clients ready after the release was ready to go. Like, it should just be turnkey every single time. And the more ways and distinct maintainers there are, the ways to generate and distinct maintainers there are, the more of a chance there is for there to be like a lagging client each time. So I think one part we haven't discussed is like making sure that there's kind of a commitment to generate the client very quickly after the release. That needs to be
I take that differently, right? I think the commitment should be a commitment to be automated, right?
Automated is great, but often we find right after things are cut that the automation doesn't work right. Like once you put the release tag in place or something crazy like that.
I guess what I'm saying is like we should have this be centralized, right? We shouldn't have each maintainer cut a separate client release. I mean,
that's of course the goal, but automation sometimes breaks down in unexpected ways.
Yeah, exactly. What happens if right at release time the automation can't do that, right?
Yeah, or somebody changes the names in the Swagger spec.
Sure, but I mean that has nothing to do with the commitment of a maintainer. That has to do with the people building the tooling or whatever. And if it's an emergency, you try and get people to act in an emergency. That's all I'm saying. Is that I feel like trying to explicitly spell out.
Sure there's no disconnect. Like we kind of feel like the maintainer of the client library is signing up to maintain the automation,
or at least compatibility with automation, right? Like
sure, I would agree with that entirely. But I would hope that we reach a point very rapidly where that interface is stabilized to the point where it's not not an issue.
I think that is a great hope, but being realistic, this is the unexpected thing to expect. This is something that will come up in almost every release for the next year or two. I'd be shocked if that doesn't happen. So something new that we did not foresee will cause it to be the case that your thing won't build right. Somebody's client.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, and I think that's fine that's part of take that on as part of the maintenance burden, just like bug fixes and everything else like that. I guess I wouldn't call it out separately, I guess. I feel like it's a bug fix like anything else, and that there's a SLA expectation of a maintainer on a bug fix.
Okay, that's fair.
So to Timothy's comment on chat, I think, yeah, we need an SDK type thing. I don't think we're quite there yet. I don't think we're going to get there in the 1.7 release. I mean, that's going to be the goal. Is like you've got a Kubernetes SDK that gives you client and server components and like sets it up for you, and you know,
Whether the server comes with the client is an open question, but
maybe there's 2 SDKs. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, for sure. I think there are for sure 2 SDKs. Anyway.
They should at least, you know,
Work together?
work together. Yeah. Okay. Have we sort of beat this horse to death?
Do we have a path forward?
I'm inclined to accept this. I think we need to better define what the criteria is so we don't have a big conversation next time. But given the assurance that we're going to have 2 owners on it and they're not going to vanish tomorrow, and the owners know they're signing up for some level of automation maintenance, then I think I'm okay with that.
Yeah, so we need to flesh out the criteria, the automation requirements, and start working on the release process and figure out how it relates to the release of the main.
Yeah, well,
project.
that's yeah.
I will say that having started looking at this, there is exactly 0 documentation about how the gen repo is intended to be used.
Yeah, that's because we're still in the middle of sort of setting up the gen repo. It's like we're extracting some code.
Right, but I know that I've gotten my butt kicked a few times for not having proposals. So like, you know, there's a degree of consistency that I think we probably have at this point.
Yeah, so there should be a client. Yeah, somebody linked it in the notes. There should be a client organization proposal. Did you see that, Brendan?
No, that's not linked in the. I see that now in the notes. That's not linked from the client
From the repo itself. Yeah.
the
Okay.
client MD, as far as I know. So.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, do we have so right now we don't have a documented proposal process for the project in general. That's something that needs to be developed. We have been following the procedure of sending PRs to the design proposals directory. I think we're going to need more structure around that because we have no way of auto-assigning reviewers of those or anything like that.
Yeah, we need to come up with something because Google Docs are way more convenient for design reviews than GitHub PRs.
Yeah, and we don't have consensus on which approach, but eventually we'll want it in Markdown.
Yeah, eventually, I think that's a good destination, but working out the details in the docs.
But they do need to be discoverable somehow, if not that way.
And the main repository is a lack of proposal, like how do we store proposals and stuff. But the Kubernetes client org is like wild west right now. Like we have even less process.
In an ideal world, it would be awesome to just say for the entire Kubernetes project, these are the list of design proposals that are like under review. These are the ones that were just approved last week or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Or rejected last week.
Yeah.
Right.
So currently it's in the community repo in the Kubernetes org.
Yeah.
And the design proposals.
Didn't you turn some of those into Markdown and store them?
Huh.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is stored in Markdown in the community repo, actually. So, yeah. Okay.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay. Next on the list is admission controllers, initializers. Is Clayton on the call?
You just. That was nice. I think you just skipped one.
Yeah. Oh, did somebody add something? Okay, so control plane to node traffic egress follow-up. We discussed this last week. Walter made a document. David made a bunch of comments on it, and I haven't had a chance to look at it since then. So I don't know. Do people remember this topic from last meeting, or do we need another recap?
I imagine the people who were involved last time still remember it.
Do you want to
The
project
idea.
Walter's doc?
So I actually don't have the latest status on this. So David or Walter, does one of you want to say stuff?
So I think we tried to outline most of the major points having to do with how would you like aggregator configured and what are the networking requirements for it? So there are a couple of cases where there are two major issues. One is whether requests coming out of the API server should be going to the service IP address or to individual pod IP addresses for an individual user API server, and the other has to do with the use of dialers. I think I made a reasonable set of arguments as to why both of these things are desirable depending on exact configuration of Kubernetes cluster. And I hopefully, I think David agreed that, you know, all of these cases need to be supported, so it's mostly a matter of how we do it. Does that sound about right, David?
It does. I thought it was a great doc. It laid out the explanation quite well. I had some comments where I didn't quite agree with all the goals, but in the end, yeah, you're right. In terms of the feature, it was largely a I can see why you want it, and even though I don't think that most people will use it or set up that way, it's reasonable to implement if we can keep it contained, and I think we can.
One of the things I added that I thought there was a missing goal, which is one thing I thought was a goal was people may want to use these aggregated aggregated API servers and the objects that are stored within them as part of the master or cluster bootstrapping process. And so it's important that whatever implementation we come up with, not make it impossible to do that. In other words, we want things to be able to happen and to reach aggregated API server, user API servers with a minimal amount of other infrastructure working at that point. I don't know if we spelled out how minimal we want to get that to. Like, does that even include the controller manager not running? I don't know. But we haven't mentioned that as one of the 5 goals. And we all, like, in addition to saying it, we need to be clear about just how minimal that set of stuff is.
I am, one of the considerations here is, like, can you bootstrap a Kubernetes cluster? And I think you definitely still can in both scenarios, but if you're relying on the network fabric to route your addresses, then I think you still can, but you wouldn't be able to overload the service or endpoints resources.
I think the key part there, and I think it's a great point, Matt, is that at some level there are certain parts of the core system in certain of these use cases which are needed to bring up full functionality of the aggregator. Mm-hmm. So it needs to be true that the aggregator and that the core functionality of the API server needs to be able to come up without successfully pulling out anything of the end user's API server. If that's true, it should all come up.
Right. But I think the question is, what goals might people want to use these user API servers to achieve in the future, right? Like, for now, obviously, we're not going to, like, none of the standard ways of bringing up a cluster are going to rely on anything in a user API server. But
yes, I think there's a couple things here. One that I want to say. One is we're in MVP mode, so let's get the basic functionality working as soon as possible.
Totally.
Or we're going to miss the boat. The other one is we should take, like, Brian has this layers document. So we should, it may already be in there, but we should take a look at that and see where do user API servers, what layer do they go in? Because that basically should inform the bootstrapping process.
Well, so in the architectural roadmap doc, I put the aggregator in the innermost layer, which I call the nucleus.
Yeah.
Because we need it in order to be able to add any other functionality. So today, the system is multiple binaries, but effectively it's monolithic. Like, every API has to be added to API server and controller manager, right? So if we want to move to a layered model where that's not true, without breaking backward compatibility, then we need the aggregation layer in the innermost in the innermost layer, and that's
And then the author of individual APIs gets to decide what layer their API needs to reside in.
or I get to decide, but
You get to
yes,
decide. They should at least be thinking about that.
they should be thinking about that. And so the way I have it right now is that this core API machinery and extensibility mechanisms like admission control extension, for example, are going to be in the nucleus. And I also put nodes and pods and the things that they depend on in kubelet in the nucleus, because Kubernetes isn't Kubernetes without the ability to actually execute stuff. And plus you can't run any extensions without being able to execute stuff. The next layer about that is the application layer, which contains most of the APIs you need to do anything useful and to have portable Helm charts or other resource manifests, for example. So things like deployment and service are in the application layer. Service is not in the nucleus very deliberately, although for complicated reasons, endpoints is in the nucleus. But
some sort of routing mechanism has to be in the nucleus.
I disagree with that, but it depends on what you mean by routing. And then other things are outer layers that are more
the aggregator has
farther
to be
up
able
than
to
that.
find things.
That's endpoints.
Okay,
But
that's a routing mechanism, right?
no, it's a discovery mechanism.
Okay, sure.
Something that actually does load balancing for you, like kubeproxy or ingress, is routing, and those are at the application layer.
Okay, yeah, sure. There
So
has to be a discovery mechanism.
Yeah, so if we're going to do component registration or doing pure discovery or things like that, you need endpoints. That's why endpoints is in the nucleus, but the endpoints controller is not.
Yeah, maybe you should take a look at the API registration API. We're just getting ready to send you a PR actually, because right now it accepts a service as an entry for how to find a user API server.
Yeah, that's probably going to be a problem. There are some known layering violations right now. Like the API server creates a service for the API server.
I mean, practically speaking, the thing that it's going to do is load the endpoints that match the name of the service. So it may not be a violation in practice, but we should look at that. It will actually look at the service, the cluster IP.
But in particular, the kubeproxy is not going to be part of the nucleus.
Or a kubeproxy drop-in replacement.
Or a drop-in replacement. Neither of those are going to be part of the nucleus.
Yeah, so it's going to be problematic.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a path forward, but maybe some more thinking to do here. Okay, next, admission controllers, initializers. Is Clayton on?
Yeah.
How was your flight, Clayton? Was the first class worth it?
It was actually. I got 4 hours of sleep, and that was all that really mattered. And I wasn't like cramped up like a sardine in a can. So on this, I think, I don't know if Jeremy's on the call. So Jeremy was pulling together the API change for the admission control webhook. So the API that the call out will be made over. And then we can start debating that API change. The initializers API, I was going to answer some of the remaining comments and make sure that there was a separate PR that has the proposed API. And then the dynamic proposal Chow had just opened his changes. And so I think the focus really is reviewing Chow's stuff. But I mean, I don't see any blockers at this point other than someone saying, I think the thing I'm still waiting for is someone to come onto that thread and say, this is totally broken and here's why this approach won't work. And I'm not hearing that.
Yeah, so the piece Chow signed up for ended up being a little bigger than we were thinking initially.
Yeah, I figured.
It always happens. So one thing that wasn't clear to me from the proposal is why do we have the webhook if you can do everything from an initial?
You can. So you cannot do parallel validation. So you can do linear validation potentially, and you can't do update validation. So update validation is actually a pretty key security hole. Like today, if you wanted to gate,
You need a for update validation. Okay, yeah, that I buy.
yeah, and there's no way to do update initializers without forking objects in etcd, because two simultaneous people coming in and starting an edit, you would have to create two objects in etcd or three or four and then merge them back in, and that's just not working.
Wait, for an update or for a create?
Update.
Yeah,
Create does not require that because create benefits from the
I'm not
magic.
convinced that update with initializers makes sense. I know we talked
I don't
about
think update with initializers does make sense.
services was the one thing that was mentioned, but
Yeah, we briefly discussed the fact that services change type, which causes problems for like Quota today, because Quota has to recalculate on an update, and Quota can do that because it's an emission controller. So the thought process here is we will almost certainly need mutating emission controllers. We will start with non-mutating emission controllers, and we will expect to find a reason to go add mutating emission controllers for update. It's kind of an advanced case.
Yeah, I'm worried that mutating emission controllers is also going to require a dependency graph or something of the order.
It will, yeah.
I really don't want to do that unless somebody is going to twist my arm.
I suspect that people will twist your arm
Okay.
because we allow mutations on pods, and mutations on pods are like the single most common security control. And so if you wanted to, for instance, validate whether a change to a pod is allowable as a security perspective, and refine something, it just, yeah.
Yeah, I think we need to let's have that conversation again here once we have a functioning like MVP.
Yeah, and that's why it's not in the initial MVP.
Yeah. Okay. Just to triple check, because I heard somebody was under the impression that the initializers ran one at a time, the first one on the list, but I thought
that's what's in the proposal right now.
Okay, I looked in the proposal and I did not see it state that, but maybe I just missed it.
It's,
why is that? Like, I would expect that the initializers could all run, and if one of them has a requirement for on another one, it can just wait. And they can make their changes with patches, and then they can all do their mutations in parallel. And I thought that would be the whole entire point of this.
So in practice today, if you all competed, you would get one update and 9 update failures.
Not
right?
patch, like that should all happen inside the API server.
So you would get
if you specify resource version, you still get conflict.
You still get conflict. So we basically turn updates into a storm. And so the thought would be, this will be alpha. If we choose to relax it, we can. And actually nothing prevents, nothing in the proposal prevents things going out of turn. I think it is a recommendation, and we can decide whether to enforce that recommendation or not.
Okay, so I would say I agree. If you're using get and update to make changes, then yeah, there's a problem. There's an update storm problem. If you use patch and you make changes that aren't going to conflict with any other initializer, I don't think there's a problem.
It depends on whether you're going to be trying to use that data later on, and whether using that data later on is something that the admission plugin does inherently, or something that a user of the admission plugin has chosen to configure.
Yeah, like an example would be the resource defaulter, and then something that goes and does a force verification of the resources. Like if you get this resource, you also have to get this other resource.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a dependency on another initializer running, then yeah, you should write to wait for that other initializer.
Right, which requires distributing that logic to all the different things that are being written. And so when someone adds a new one, they have to go set that. Whereas today, an admin can just set them in order. So it's kind of I'm not against it. I just don't know that it's the simplest thing that we start with, because update latency isn't really our problem today. Or create latency isn't our problem today.
Okay. Oh, okay. Sure. I guess that makes sense. And for super minor things, like you can still do. Yeah, I can see how it matters for some things.
Yeah, and I figured we'd get more experience on that if we do the simple thing and then grow out.
Yeah, I want to think carefully before we start putting dependency graphs, and that sounds like a nightmare.
Yep.
Okay. Now there's 2 items on this that I didn't put here and I don't know anything about. So Ahmet, are you on this call?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. So, hello, my name is Ahmet. I'm from Google, and this is my first SIG API Machinery meeting. And I would like to say that I don't know much about the API, and I think that is one of the reasons. That's one of the things that we're going to talk about. So, I'm trying to create a proposal for a samples effort for the client libraries. The reason for that is because I think we kind of assume that people know how to use the Kubernetes API, and people know how to, directly take the client libraries and do whatever they want to do with them. However, currently the case is that it is not super easy, and we're not making it super friendly to use the Kubernetes API. So I'm planning to start a samples effort to create a set of samples that exist in the officially supported client libraries. I guess that's currently Go and Python.
Yeah, I think Chow has an issue with a list of samples we were looking at.
Actually, he commented in that issue, and I think what we want to achieve is making the learning curve easier.
Yeah.
So it will be first we will show them the examples where you just do the basic CRUD operation, and then doing some advanced tasks. I think maybe you can explain more.
Sure. So Daniel, perhaps can you click on the link?
Yeah.
That would be great. Thank you. So one of the first things is, we got some of the beginner tasks already covered in today's client libraries, and that's great. But, we have more advanced tasks like how do I use the informers, how do I actually use the watch API, and how does this thing work, with possibly more explanation. And then possibly I'm thinking about adding some scaffolding, controllers, operators, schedulers, like basically just code stubs that let people just take off from there. So I'm probably going to create a small proposal and send to the mailing list, but I'm wondering, what do you guys think right away?
That sounds great. You should sync up with Phil Whitrock if you haven't already. You should also think about how are you going to represent these things in alternative languages, because we want to end up with documentation that shows you snippets for basically every API call in every language that we have a client for.
Yeah, I was hoping that we would probably stick with example programs, just like the Go client library does today. There are folders, and each folder is a main package, and people can go from there.
Sure. That's better than what we have now, and I'm definitely not going to stop you. But please do keep in mind that eventually we're going to want similar samples for lots of languages.
Yeah, that sounds okay.
I would also.
We have informers in other languages, right?
We don't have informers in other languages yet, but we can at least explain how to use the watch API. So yeah, so some things are not going to be easy in other languages, but we're going to have to think about that long term.
Okay, that sounds good. So another thing is that none of this stuff is actually documented on the Kubernetes.io website at all. Like, there is no page about the client libraries whatsoever. So I'm planning to create those pages and possibly add concepts about, like, the high-level concepts documented, such as the watch API, for instance.
Yeah,
That's super awesome.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Please make sure you sync up with Phil Whitrock, who's done the API documentation that is there.
Yep, sounds good. All right, thank you.
Cool. All right, real quick, and then we can all go. Status update on encrypting secrets at rest.
Sure, I don't know if Greg's on or not. So I just put this in, and we split the proposal into 2 parts: the underlying details and the config / irritation / complicated stuff. So the thought is that the core details are fairly straightforward. barring some tuning or tweaking that we might do of making sure that there's appropriate room for future, replacing crypto providers with different algos, et cetera, as well as the on-disk format, and then everything else, keys, et cetera, is all just a higher plane. So still trying to get that pushed through an adequate review so that we can merge the storage PR for that.
Okay.
Is there a like a design doc or something that you can link from this, whatever the word is, the agenda?
Yeah, is there a design doc we can link in these notes?
Yeah, I'll link the new proposals.
Okay.
Thank you.
So on a slightly related note, we've encountered some etcd. We've encountered a couple problems with etcd3 here, and that has resulted in attempting to dig through the data to what is going on in this etcd database. So we're still trying to figure out what's going on.
Is this the watch change stuff, or is this something else?
No, this is a database got real big and ran out of.
Oh, this is the fail-safe stuff that Brendan says is an etcd.
No, it's like it filled up with free pages,
Yeah.
and we don't understand why.
Because of Bolt, yeah.
Yeah, so I was like digging through the Bolt database. I filed one issue with Bolt where the command line tool doesn't parse the free page block correctly. But basically I said this to say something we're going to need is an analysis program that parses the Bolt database and prints out what is there. And we especially need this after we start storing proto.
Yeah, boy, yeah. I totally forgot about that, although I have it written down on the to-do list. That's the other thing that can be an issue, is that even if you can get Bolt to tell you what's in it, or you can get etcd-ctl to tell you what's in it, it's not JSON.
It's not JSON, that's proto. And like I was able to look at one etcd database and see what was in it just because it was still JSON. So I just used the strings program to dump all the strings. That worked fine. But we got another one that is full of proto, and it's kind of hard to figure out what's running.
Is that so?
Because the problem
is that a request for volunteers?
If people are feeling like it shouldn't be too bad, right? Like you try to just copy our encoding pipeline and put in a program and just dump it out, or
bring in the Bolt libraries, bring in the proto stuff, and
even like you could link in the Bolt libraries and add look up a key and see.
Jordan, didn't Matcha write one of these?
Who?
I had one a long time ago for a dump and a restore, but it did not bother or we don't have it for etcd3.
I thought they just added that. I'll ping them. I thought Matcha had written something recently that did this because of that complaint. But I'll go take a look and see if I can find it.
Awesome.
Yeah, so anyway, I'm mentioning this because obviously the purpose of encrypting secrets is to break any such program. So or maybe it's not, maybe we do need to let an administrator in an emergency get the secret out of the database. I'm not sure.
I think he should just reinstall his entire thing and start it from scratch.
Yeah, that works for me.
Is anybody looking at the etcd watch issue?
I am not aware of this etcd watch.
We figured that one out. It was a version. You remember when we had the issue and Andy ended up debugging it and finding a problem in etcd3 with regard to compaction windows and stuff?
Yep.
So it looks like at some level of etcd, they fixed it. And so you need to have etcd 3.11 or something. I linked the issue and we found the compatible level. We just have to have some way to detect and tell people they're doing it wrong.
Okay, so this was some watch events weren't showing up, like delete watch events. So
I imagine this would cause our tests to fail. Is that
it's
correct?
only outside the window, which is very long.
Oh, so we should run our tests with a short window so that we catch stuff like this.
We may not be running a broke version of etcd if it's because we're running with 3.0.17.
Yeah. So it sounds like we should have the fix, but if if something like this happens in the future, I would like it if our tests told us.
It'd be awesome if we could write a failing test that fails with a broken version of
Yes,
etcd.
absolutely.
I can try and follow up on that one. Yeah, or at least in one test. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we don't want every test to go red when this happens.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sure.
It should fail the GC tests, right?
It should have failed lots of tests.
Yeah.
I imagine. Okay.
We're done.
Looks like we're through our agenda, so let's call it a day.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.